Good morning from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. The G20 summit in France failed, for now, to come up with a fix for the European economy. Instead, European leaders have pushed Italy to embrace a new austerity plan. And in Greece, Prime Minister George Papandreou, born in Minneapolis, educated at Amherst, narrowly survived a no-confidence vote by pledging to step aside and form a coalition government that would push through another round of austerity measures over public opposition. More on what those stories mean for the American economy, and they mean a lot. And on the latest allegations against Republican presidential candidate Herman Cain later in the program. Right now, I am joined by Sam Seder, host of The Majority Report and co-host of Ring of Fire, writer and activist Michaela Angela Davis, former fashion editor at Essence Magazine, Elise Jordan, a contributor at The National Review and former speechwriter for Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, and UP veteran John McWhorter, professor of linguistic and American studies at Columbia, as well as a contributing editor to The New Republic and TheRoot.com. Everybody, it's so great to have you at the table. Thanks for getting up so early.
Good morning.
So today is officially bank transfer day. It's Move Your Money Day. In Washington last night, 3 D.C. protesters who were protesting a Koch brothers event were hit by a car as they tried to block access to the Koch brothers funded event. Witnesses told NPR that the protesters, quote, either ran toward or jumped in front of the moving vehicle. The 3 injured protesters were taken to the hospital, their injuries said to be non-life-threatening. And although police told the local Fox affiliate the driver first struck 2 of them and then kept going to hit the 3rd, the driver was not charged. The Guardian newspaper reports that another Iraq War veteran was sent to the hospital after joining Occupy Oakland protests. This is after Iraq War veteran was put in critical condition last week during the tear gas assault that happened. He told the Guardian he was beaten by police following the general strike there this week, the first in the city since 1946. The strike was called in response to the injury of Scott Olson, an Iraq War veteran whose skull was fractured in a confrontation with police last month. Thousands of protesters came out in support of the strike, which culminated in shutting down the nation's 5th largest port for most of the day. Do we have that photo of the bikes in front of the port? I really like that photo. 3,187 people have been arrested in the Occupy movement so far, but at least 90 Occupy encampments are still open and operating across the country. And today is an opportunity, as I said before, for those who support Occupy Wall Street to do something concrete about it, because it is officially Bank Transfer Day. So Move Your Money is this idea, and actually it was an Arianna Huffington brainchild a while back, and it never quite caught fire, they talked about it. And the idea being, look, if you don't like the too big to fail banks, the ones that got TARP money and have consolidated, the ones that were largely responsible for the financial crisis, then stop being their customer and go out and move your money to a credit union. And we were talking about doing this topic today in the editorial meeting, and I was like, is this a thing? Like, is this actually a thing, or are we hyping a thing that's not a thing? And then we got this amazing data yesterday that in the past month, since September 29th, when Bank of America announced that new $5 debit fee, in the past month, 650,000 Americans have joined credit unions, which is more than all of 2010 combined. So I wonder, what do you guys think of this idea of Move Your Money as activism, as an expression of a political view? Elise, as the table's lone Republican, what do you think about Move Your Money?
I think it's kind of common sense. It surprises me that it's this trendy movement, because I'm from Mississippi and I've always had my money in a community bank, and it's local board members. They're responsible to the community. They have a vested interest in the community around them, and so it's not. I mean, to go deposit in Bank of America when I'm in Mississippi, I have to drive an hour. So it's not like there are these huge outposts of banks. So this is kind of, it seems to me, somewhat of a blue state problem, in the sense that there are plenty of people around the country who already have their money in community banks. And I think that's a great thing, and I have no problem.
Well, but it's more than a blue state problem insofar as what has happened is.
Exactly.
And if you talk, one of the things that's happened for people that had their money in local banks is that those local banks have been eaten up by bigger banks.
Yeah,
so,
exactly.
I mean, everybody.
So it's great to support the local banks, and it's good that people are actually giving attention to this and doing something about it.
The interesting thing is I'm not sure how much it really hurts the banks or actually sort of stabilizes the industry. But what it is what we're seeing is a growing series of steps that people are taking and getting more engaged with the issues that they see that they have a problem with in the country. So while this may not have a direct effect, it's one more step that people are taking psychologically to get involved in a movement that's growing exponentially, it seems, week after week.
This is historical because with movements like these, there's always a danger that what's really keeping it going and what really interests people is the spectacle, the natural joy of acting up, of a kind of unfocused cynicism. I was afraid that Occupy Wall Street was going to be only that. I was afraid that for smart people to say they support it means that they like watching people being angry and laying in front of cars and creating drama. But it has to be more than that. For people to actually do something, I've thought to myself, are people going to throw themselves in front of cars requiring that something actually change in the country? If we're going to actually start making our banks step up, and even if that's somewhat symbolic at this point, then Occupy Wall Street becomes something other than what there'll be a movie about in 2 years.
To that point, I was wondering the use of trend. Do you think that this is trendy, or like you said, it's another step in strategies or way that people feel that they are being active in their own lives and seeing and challenging economic democracy? Like, we see democracy work in a lot of ways, except for in our economics. And this, though, as you say, may be symbolic, but it is I see it as part of a movement, not a trendy act.
Well, I think it's interesting. What I think is interesting about it is that it puts together two things, right? There's the element of it that's political, right? Which is that you are the banks that caused the crisis, and you are the recipients of bailout money. You're too big to fail. You're screwing us, right? And then there's this consumer activism part, which is that nobody likes their banks. Everybody hates their banks. Everybody I know, and I'm serious, everybody I know hates their banks. I find myself, I'm not going to say who my bank is, but I find myself, I'm a fairly on top of it person. I have to get up to come to the show. I generally hit my deadlines, and I find myself getting overdraft fees all the time. Like, all sorts of hidden fees are popping up. You know what I mean? Like, and there's something wrong with the system if that is happening, right?
It's the bank loyalty with a small town bank. If in the past I might have had an overdraft, you're a loyal customer, and so they might, tend to overlook it in a way that's never going to happen with Bank of America.
Is that actually true? Is that like something that you could like?
I mean, not as a blanket, but you call and you say, hey, it's just a
can we work this out?
Hey,
can y'all work this out?
I'll get business. I'm getting business for the bank. Come on down. They'll take your money.
I mean, but if you feel everyone at this table is obviously privileged because we're at this table.
Sure.
So if you're feeling that,
right? Yes, exactly.
Imagine how you're feeling in Mississippi without any money, and your bank is still sucking you. And the community banks work on some level, but if you've got to move money, if you've got to do business, if you have to have your check cleared in a day, sometimes that doesn't work. So we have to figure out how we can be human beings, but also work and be.
Well, we also have to figure out how we can impose.
Community banks. I'm not sure. I've read the statistic, but I mean they will give loans more readily to small businesses, and they fund a ton of farming. So it's much more. I feel like community banks do help.
Well, the model of community banking has been relatively. Hasn't been quite as wiped out by the subprime crisis, and partly that's because of, and some scholars have written about this, the model of community banking rests on actual judgment and actual interaction, right?
Yeah.
So the whole idea, and we all know this from It's a Wonderful Life, right? The whole idea is that like the guy comes in to say, I'm going to start this diner, and you say, actually, I don't think it's going to work because I know that corner, there's not enough street traffic on that corner, so I think that's probably not a good idea, or I know you're a responsible guy, you're going to pay your money back. And so that was the model that was completely destroyed by the sort of conglomeration, financialization of a sector that then became extremely attenuated and impersonal, right? And that has led us to the doorstep
and also
of crisis.
There was, in terms of that model, there was sort of some incentives that were across purposes. Instead of sort of me determining whether or not you're a valid loan, I'm just saying, I don't care.
Right.
I don't even
That's
care.
Right.
I want
it's
the
even
fees,
worse. Right.
So I'm going to actually make you appear to be a good loan because I'm going to get the fees, and then I'm going to sell that loan to somebody I don't even know.
Right.
And so that was a big problem. But I think the amazing thing about this is not just that people are doing it because they're upset as a consumer or even the politics, but they're overcoming a tremendous amount of intimidation because I look at my bank statements and half the time I don't even understand what the columns are. And so the idea of moving to another bank and just, oh my God, what's going to happen to my check if I do direct deposit? It's very intimidating. I consider myself someone who's somewhat savvy about it.
I feel that way about two things in my life. I say this having spent 3 hours yesterday trying to figure out what the credit default swap exposure of American banks was to Greek sovereign debt. my cell phone bill and my bank statement are completely and totally impenetrable, completely opaque, and totally beyond my grasp. And there seems like there's something wrong if that's the case. We're going to talk more about Move Your Money, Occupy Wall Street, and a whole lot more after this break. We just found out CBS News is reporting that Andy Rooney has passed away at the age of 92 years. We send our condolences to his friends and family. Wanted to let you know. We're back at the table here talking about Occupy Wall Street and Move Your Money. Elise Jordan, you're catching some flack on Twitter. Someone says, "What happens to National Review editors who go on Chris Hayes' show? Does he inject them with Jane Fonda blood first?" I think you have not been carrying the torch for the big banks. But I actually think
that what's in here?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Little did you know. Shout out to Jazz Shaw, by the way, whose Twitter handle I will say on air, a loyal conservative viewer. What I do think is interesting, actually, is one of the things, the sort of animus people feel towards banks and the feeling that they are removed and a kind of focus on localism in the sense of community banks is one of the places where we have one of these interesting ideological overlaps, I think, between Occupy Wall Street people and Tea Party people and people on right and left who feel that the system is too big and too removed in the abstract.
Well, what I found, I went down to Occupy Wall Street yesterday, and what I found surprising about it was a lot of the stances, and this would have been offensive had I really decided to engage with some of the protesters, were similar to Tea Party stances. They hate the Fed. It's despair. There are many different grievances and movements represented down there, but the animus towards the Fed, and then there was someone I talked to for a long time about how he thought that we were ruining the economy for the next generation, so generational theft, which is a huge Tea Party theme. And so I think that this is something that right now the movement is very polarizing, but you really look at it and it's grassroots Tea Partiers, people in red states, and then there are plenty of people on the radical left who do have, Ron Paul wants to get rid of the Fed too.
Right.
It's interesting that the Occupy movement is global. However, I don't see the Tea Party in Greece. You know what I mean? I don't see them.
That's an interesting point.
I just came back from South Africa, and the youth ANC were doing the same thing. And their issues were very similar. It was
really, were they doing like Occupy public spaces?
Yeah, and they gathered in downtown Johannesburg, and they traveled to Pretoria, and it was mostly young people, like in Greece and like in Italy. They're young people with no jobs and no thought of jobs, but their issues are about education, about economic balance, and for them in South Africa, mostly about land redistribution and access to jobs. So where I do, that's what's so fascinating about what was so fascinating about the Tea Party movement was it was very civic and very American.
Yes.
However, the philosophy wasn't global. That's why you don't see tea in the UK.
Although there was briefly, this was one of the most hilarious footnotes in the whole Tea Party movement, was that there was a period of time in which conservative activists in the UK said they were going to try to start a British Tea Party. It was like, well, which side of that are you going to be taking the tea back out of the water and putting it onto the boat? Is that the version of the
Another similarity, though, between the Tea Party and Occupy Wall Street that I must admit depresses me a little bit is that they're both fundamentally rather middle-class movements. And so the idea with the Tea Party is we want our country back. Wait a minute. With Occupy Wall Street, a lot of the theme is it's getting too hard to be middle class. The system isn't fair. We want to redistribute. Whereas there's a part of me that's nostalgic. I wasn't really old enough to be there. Nostalgic for there are too many people who are on the very bottom permanently. There was a war on poverty or an attempt at it. With Occupy Wall Street, it's more I've been to college and I have an abstract awareness that there's
I don't think
there's something very true.
I think there's an element of that, but I think that's more of an addition rather than an exclusivity. I mean, one of the elements that took place in Oakland the other night was that the occupiers occupied the Travelers Aid Society, which is essentially an abandoned building at this point, but housed a homeless center. And one of the things that's interesting that's happening about the Occupy movement is that there is a host of issues that are sort of emanating out of it and getting into the mix, whether it's stop and frisk, whether it's vets' rights, as they come back, whether it's homeless.
There was a Helping Pets down there, too.
There is a broad scope of issues that are coming out of it. And the other major difference is almost a process one, because, empirically speaking, we know now through research the Tea Party is essentially longtime Republicans. I don't think you can say the same in terms of the partisanship of the Occupy Wall Streeters. It definitely tilts Democrats, but I think to a certain extent, there are people outside to the left of that spectrum.
Yes, and I
agree with that. It's a lot of Democrats that I think that Obama is going to have a tough time getting to go out for him in numbers.
So you're saying that it would be a good thing if the focus wasn't what the spark was, which was rich people are too rich, and we who used to be in the middle class are becoming poor. That was the start of this. And you're saying that now it's becoming something else.
I think there's a lot of things that are emanating out of that perspective.
Yeah, let me talk about that for a second, because I think you touched on something I want to play a piece of tape, which is this went pretty viral on the internet, and it gets at this point of one of the most interesting things I think about Occupy Wall Street is that the openness of the template has produced this sort of burst of creativity, different ways of encountering the system, different kinds of activism, creating a new vocabulary for political protest, and different issues. So this is someone who came up with an extremely clever way to sort of have it at the banks, and posted this video about how you can use junk mail envelopes that you get from the banks to sort of stick it back to the bank. Check this out.
Most of the junk mail I get is unsolicited credit card offers, and up until Occupy Wall Street, I used to just toss these in the bin unopened. But Occupy Wall Street got me thinking. These offers are from the same financial institutions that ruined our economy by speculating on the housing market. Everyone can do this. Just take the envelope, lick it, seal it, and send it back empty. This isn't really about running up the postage bill in the big banks, although that's a nice side effect. The real effect of this is to force banks to react to us. If they start getting hundreds and thousands of weird responses to their credit card applications, well, they're going to have meetings. They're going to have to develop new procedures. And every hour banks spend reacting to us is an hour banks don't spend lobbying Congress on how to screw us. It's an hour banks don't spend foreclosing on our houses. So I think that that's progress.
So a clever way of sort of expressing one's dissent and protest to the banks by using their junk mail. Then the other clip I want to play you, because this shows another emanation of the sort of Occupy Wall Street ethos and the way in which it's produced. It's almost like the internet, in that the internet isn't a thing. There is no content that is the internet. It is a platform, and then people do all sorts of different things in it. They make Wikipedia, or they make videos of their cat falling asleep in an adorable fashion. So this is John's like, I think I've seen that one. Nodding his head. So this is a bunch of people at a speech that Governor Scott Walker of Wisconsin, Republican Governor Scott Walker, gave in Chicago. And this is people showing up at the speech and using the people's mic, which is this method of retransmitting the human voice that they use down in Zuccotti Park, where Elise Jordan was yesterday. This is them talking back to Scott Walker in Chicago.
The sole purpose is to run a Congress in the state of Wisconsin.
Mike check! Mike check! Mike check! Mike check! It's a holiday day! And we see you at this fancy breakfast! And we see you at this fancy breakfast! Listen to someone!
Their voices are a little bit different than others out there, but along the way.
On the lives of working families! On the lives of working families! Governor Walker is vilified! Governor Walker is vilified!
So we're used to
And
this.
it's up to the 99%! And it's up to the 99%! You got a picture of him?
You cannot living wages!
You cannot living wages!
They have benefits to support their families!
And that's benefits to support their families!
Millionaire Koch brothers!
So that's the folks talking to Scott Walker, talking back to Scott Walker using the human mic. Let's take a break here and then talk more about this issue, Occupy Wall Street, right after we come back. How about that?
Great.
Getting you in the mood to chill already here at 7:30 in the morning on Saturday. We just brought it. That was my call, by the way, in case anyone is giving heck to the control room folks.
I like that little chair dance.
Thanks, yeah. Just give it a little electric feel.
Get jiggy with it.
It's going to be on the highlight.
I had threatened this. I know. I had threatened this last weekend when the Herman Cain ad, "I Am America," came out, that I really wanted to do "I Am America" karaoke. I was like, can we do 3 minutes where I sing that song? Which, by the way, has been in my head for 2 straight weeks, and I won't sing it now dangerous. For you. Let me read this email quick, and then I'll let you guys weigh in out. This is another data point in the "Is Move Your Money a Thing?" question. This is an excerpt from an email the website Firedog Lake obtained, reporting that it's an internal email that Chase sent to its employees last week. Quote, "Global security and investigations is monitoring tightly and will ensure we have appropriate preparedness and security on site." This is for Bank Transfer Day. "Our branch partners need our awareness and support. Let's help make sure Bank Transfer Day becomes Chase Pride Day." A spokesman for Chase would neither refute nor confirm the email's authenticity. And let me also say this for the record here. We reached out to JP Morgan Chase, Citibank, and Goldman Sachs, invite them to send anyone they wanted to come talk with us. They all declined. And I would reiterate again that I would love to have, I would have a panel with 4 representatives of the major too big to fail banks, happily. And also want to wish you all a happy Chase Pride Day.
Oh, thank you very much.
I've been chasing Pride for a long time.
Well played. Yeah, so we're seeing all these sort of different ways of sort of producing disruption, drama, as John said. And I think, yeah, Sam.
Well, what we just saw in terms of that mic check in the, with Scott Walker, is not just about disruption. I mean, it's fundamentally a transfer of the authority in that room. I mean, you have...
That's interesting.
There was a wonderful video of the same thing happening at the Department of Education meeting in New York City, where essentially they had to close down the meeting because the chancellor started to speak, and then essentially the parents of children started to speak, and they
with the same mic check thing,
and they suddenly had the same authority as those people on the dais with the electronic microphones. It is a fascinating shift. And the other thing I would say that is different in terms of this movement versus the Tea Party is that, and with all due respect, while the Tea Party dressed up like the Founding Fathers, on some level these people are actually acting like it. I mean, they are down in Zuccotti Park, and they are creating a new organization.
Respond to that, Elise.
Here's how I think they're alike. Both movements are very white. And that's something that the mainstream media hasn't wanted to report on because it goes against the narrative of what they say Occupy Wall Street is.
I was just in South Africa.
Yeah. Well, I was.
It's not very white there.
No, but Zuccotti Park. But I would also say Zuccotti Park is. Let me say this. No one's taken a census, but Zuccotti Park is far more diverse than the Tea Party rallies I've gone to. Just to stipulate.
Oh, definitely.
There's no question. There's no question.
Also, people are only covering the big cities. The Occupy in little towns. And this is why I, was sort of challenging that idea that it's just middle class. Like, there are real working class people, there are poor people, there are teachers, there are firefighters in these, 300, 400, 20, 30 Occupies all over the country. It's not just Oakland and Zuccotti Park. It's all over, and it's multi-generational, multi-socioeconomic. It's a real
I haven't been to any of those places, so I'm not going to.
Yeah.
Because I'm just literally ingesting what the media is giving me.
Yeah.
But you look at how, like with the Tea Party rally, there was the allegations that with John Lewis there were racial slurs against him. That still hasn't died out in the media, even though no one has proven whether it was one isolated person, whether it even happened. Yet there are people wearing there was a pretty horrific shirt with an anti-Semitic slur. The media is making nothing over that.
We did cover. We covered the anti-Semitic slurs last week on the program, where we went into depth on one of the people who was featured in the ad alleging anti-Semitism at Occupy Wall Street. I think
accountability. Keep it accountable.
This is Lotion Man, whose video we ran. I think what the video showed, just to button this, that it is not at all representative. In fact, Yom Kippur services were held at Zuccotti Park with dozens in attendance.
There was more people. There was hundreds of people at Kol Nidre service.
At Kol Nidre service,
there were more people there than at my shul in my hometown.
But in the same way that I don't think that the Occupy Wall Street, I don't think that one isolated person, but the Tea Party, the mainstream media has loved the narrative that the Tea Party is racist.
Let me respond to that for a second, and then, John, I'll let you weigh in, which is that I will say this. I will concede this. The ad about anti-Semitism and Occupy Wall Street did make me think hard to myself about what standard I would apply to guilt by association for members of the Tea Party, particularly given that incident. I think that's a fair point to say if one person at that crowd said something heinous, it does not then go, it is not put upon the entire crowd. That said, I think there is polling data, strong polling data, that shows that racial attitudes of people who identify in the Tea Party are consistently not the kind of racial attitudes I particularly think are very enlightened. John McWhorter.
I think all of this is about motivation. If that's true, and that apparently is true, was the Tea Party motivated, even in part, by this kind of subtle racist animus? And I would say, even though I am not a conservative, that I don't see the evidence for that. In the same way with Occupy Wall Street, despite all of the diverse threads that we're seeing, is it fundamentally motivated by, stoked by, a middle-class sense of aggrievement at the idea that there are too many people who are too rich and middle-class people who are becoming less middle-class? Because if that's the main thing, I worry when one of the main problems in the country is, for example, poor or working-class people who don't know how to have a middle-class existence without going to college. So, for example, the education aspect of Occupy Wall Street interests me more than what goes on with people transferring their funds from one bank to another.
I want to go to a break because after this we're going to talk about the middle class and Congress, which is decidedly not middle class. That's my story of the week. Up after this. My story of the week, the Millionaires Club. We got new data this week on the personal wealth of members of Congress, and it was terrific news for members of Congress. According to an analysis of members' financial disclosure forms conducted by rollcall.com, while the rest of America has been struggling through recession, Congress's net worth is up a whopping 25% from 2 years ago. Now, keep in mind, Congress reports its assets in ranges, so these numbers are all taken from the minimum ends of those ranges, and importantly, disclosure forms don't include the value of members' homes, which in many cases are pretty damn schwanky. And even with all that undercounting, the median wealth of members of Congress was still a little more than $500,000, which is about 5 times the median wealth of the American public at large. If you include estimates of real estate wealth, Congress has 220 millionaires out of 535 members, or 40% of both houses of our legislative body. Keep in mind, this is in a country, our country, in which only 9% of households have $1 million in assets. Now, at some level, this isn't so surprising, right? It was back during the first Gilded Age the United States Senate was dubbed the Millionaires Club because it was so populated with the friends, associates, and offspring of that era's robber barons. And more broadly, it's not so strange that a legislature in a representative democracy will be composed of members of the elite. We don't expect legislatures to look exactly like the publics they represent in terms of their levels of education and professional accomplishment. But I think the social distance between members of Congress and average Americans tends to exacerbate the worst instincts of that institution, and is one of the least noticed but most insidious byproducts of our current campaign financing system. Here's why. Let us say you decide tomorrow to run for Congress in your district, and you call the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee and inform them of this decision, and they say, okay, if you want us to help you, go out and raise $300,000 in the next 3 months. So, how would one go about doing that? Well, to begin with, you need a staff to raise that kind of money, and how do you pay for your staff? This is where personal fortune comes in very, very handy. See, it's pretty helpful to be able to write a check for $100,000 to get office space and pay fundraising consultants and hire a chief of staff, or to take out a big loan against your multi-million-dollar home. And once you've got your operation up and running, you still have to find people to contribute. Hopefully people who can max out or give the maximum amount of $2,500 to your campaign. Keep in mind, only 1/2 of 1%, see this handy pie chart, of people in this country max out to any particular candidate. So you're not likely to find these kinds of donors just by bumping into them at the grocery store buying milk or pressing the flesh at the local bingo hall in your district. And this is where it becomes very helpful to have a social network that includes the email addresses and phone numbers of hundreds of high net worth individuals. In other words, it's helpful to have a lot of rich friends. And you know what kind of person is most likely to have lots of rich friends? A rich person. The point is that the entire system of campaign finance selects for rich people. As a non-rich person, raising the kind of money you need to raise to be competitive is nearly impossible. When we think about the insidious effects of inequality in our campaign finance system, we tend to focus on the ways in which big money interests can more or less purchase policy by donating to candidates and hiring armies of lobbyists. But my time in Washington taught me that the subtle cultural peer effects of being around wealthy people all the time are just as, maybe even more pernicious. If you fill your elected body with members of the 1%, it is not so surprising that it produces policy reliably beneficial to the 1%. Just imagine for a moment what this country would look like if 40% of members of Congress were union members or lived below the poverty line. A big part of the reason the 99% feels underrepresented by our political system is because, well, they are. Joining us now at the table, I have my friend Rob Johnson. He's an international investor, financial consultant. He was at the managing director of the Soros Fund Management, served on the UN Commission on International Monetary Reform under Nobel Prize-winning economist Joseph Stiglitz. He's a senior fellow at the Roosevelt Institute. Rob, thanks for coming here.
My pleasure.
You're here straight from Europe. You were at the G20. Before we get to the G20, which is why I brought you here, you are going to untangle the Grecian mess for us. But you just told me something during the break about Move Your Money. That I thought was interesting.
That's right. The origins of Move Your Money were at a dinner with Arianna Huffington, the filmmaker Eugene Jarecki, who made that wonderful Frank Capra adaptation for the website, my wife Alexis McGill, who's an African-American political activist, and myself. And it was born of frustration. I heard Sam talking about it a little bit earlier. He was saying that these people are frustrated because you're getting nothing on your deposits, you're paying 31% on your credit card, and you're watching them use the profits for bonuses and lobbying to make things worse for you.
Right.
So you got to start feeling empowered.
Right.
That's where it started with that dinner. Nobody felt that necessarily. I mean, the Fed discount window can fill the hole of all the deposits that leave.
Right.
That's the truth of the matter. But you feel better. Not
by the way,
I just want to know, did everyone move their money?
All
that's a great question.
Yeah.
Oh, I already had, so I qualified, but the others did, yes.
So you don't have
yes, and several foundations.
That was a good question, and that would have been totally embarrassing. I totally would have lied if I were Rob. In response, if I hadn't moved my money.
I actually didn't have
one answer to give.
But I got staff, everything I was on a board of, a foundation or whatever, everybody joined in very quickly.
So, Rob, the reason I wanted you to come here is because we've been following the developments out of Greece very closely, and the Eurozone, and let me just sort of set this up for people that haven't been paying attention. Greece, the fundamental problem is that Greece has a lot of debt, and they have so much debt, and they are paying such high interest rates on that debt that they cannot afford it. And not afford it in the sort of vague, abstract way that conservatives will talk about the U.S. not afford it, as in there isn't enough cash sitting in the Treasury to pay the interest on their debt. I mean, they are really up against the wall right now.
They've gone over the waterfall.
They have gone over the wall.
Back up.
Yes. So the solution to that, there was a first-round solution to that, was to say, okay, you need to get your deficit under control, and a series of very harsh austerity measures were passed in the spring. Those included a 10% cut to the public workforce, a freeze on pay for 3 years, I think, raising taxes on their value-added tax from 22% to the 30s, I think. I mean, very big, real crush, right? It's reduced GDP growth in the country by, I think, 5%. So the economy is being squeezed and pushed and pushed. And as it gets squeezed and pushed, the Greeks are no more able to make the payments now.
Austerity doesn't work.
Right, when it happened 6 months ago. So now we're on Groundhog Day, and this is the second day where everybody wakes up with a Greek crisis. And they've come up with another program, which is the French and Germans are going to get together and guarantee some of the Greek bank debt. The creditors who own those bonds, right, they are owed money by Greece, are going to take what's called a haircut, which means they're only going to get 50 cents on the dollar. And the Greeks are going to go through another crushing period of austerity.
Yes.
And faced with this crushing period of austerity, the Prime Minister of Greece, George Papandreou, who's a fascinating character, center-left, said, you know what, let's have a referendum. Because I don't want to sit here and have the opposition, the center-right opposition, throw stones at me and say I'm responsible for this. I want actually a mandate for this. And everyone panicked. Europe panicked. People said, no, the deal's off. You can't have any help. We'll cut off the payments to you if you let people vote on this package. What do you make of that that development?
Well, I think we all have to laugh a little bit that the place where democracy originated is now terrified of resorting to democracy. Papandreou had no choice. I think he would have failed in a no-confidence vote, technically. And Yet when he put that referendum up and scared everybody, it brought everybody back together.
Right. Just so people understand, basically, by threatening the referendum, he basically convinced the opposition to say, okay, we'll work with you to pass this, even though no one in the Greek populace wants to pass it.
The dirty secret here is everybody is terrified of what happens when something the size of the state of Nevada goes bust, because it propagates through our absolutely ungovernable international banking system.
Right. You said to me while we were talking in the green room for the show that it might as well be, Greece, for all intents and purposes, might as well be the 51st state in terms of how a Greek failure would impact us.
Greek failures affect your front yard, because the musical chairs game of somebody can't pay, with all, as you mentioned, credit default swaps and all the other problems, means everybody's scared that somebody's holding the bag and they can't find out where it is. So all the investors back away from all the banks. You get a synchronized worldwide shock. Everybody freaks out, and it starts to deflate and depress the United States.
Let's talk after this break about how to avoid that, right, when we come back. We're back here. We have Rob Johnson at the table. We are talking about Greece having gone over the waterfall and being unable to get back up it. And you just laid out a terrifying scenario of global domino cataclysm. Before we're going to talk about how to avoid that, first, explain to people, why is Greece in the bind it is in? I think people have a conception that, their welfare state's too big. That's the kind of answer here. Is that the problem?
Part of the problem is rich people don't like to pay taxes anywhere, and in Greece they've done a very effective job of not paying those taxes. That's number one.
Right.
Number two, Greece was an outpost during the Cold War for the United States. Very heavy military, and partly because of their tensions with Turkey. But after the Cold War ended, people want to consolidate and shrink the state. But government after government fell, so they just kept padding the civil service, paying more. In essence, their economy structure is very dependent on the state. Whether that's healthy in the long run or not, people can differ.
Right.
But getting from here to there is very stressful.
So they have a situation where, like I said before, the actual ledger really is dire. I mean, it's not, because there's so much hype here about where to the next Greece, it's really important for people to understand the numbers are just incredibly different. They're borrowing at 15% and not 0%. They have a primary deficit, which means they just don't have enough to pay their interest.
And to draw parallels to the United States, because of Greece, which is what all this anxiety in America and the super committee is about, is madness.
Yeah.
It's madness. It doesn't apply.
And they don't have control of their own currency.
Exactly.
I mean, they're completely hamstrung by
When you want to get out, you can do one of three things. You can do inflation, which they can't.
So explain the options. You can inflate your way out of it, but they can't do because they don't control their currency.
You can do austerity, which is, as you said in the last segment, a bad end game because it just makes things worse.
Right. We're going to be here in 6 months. If this austerity package
That's about
passes,
who bears the burden, not about whether you're getting out of trouble.
Right.
And then the third part, which in religious terms they call the Jubilee, the restructuring of the debt, and that's where we got to be, except everybody's terrified to do that to the banks.
So the only way out of this is some kind of debt forgiveness and debt restructuring. Nobody wants to do that.
And we should have done it a year and a half ago, except everybody was afraid of the banks. And what's really going on in Greece, in the big picture, is fear of the structure of ungovernable banks pitted against democracy.
We're going to talk more about this with Rob Johnson, Elise Jordan, John McWhorter, and Sam Seder right after this break. We're back here with Rob Johnson, you were just at the G20, am I correct?
No, I was in Budapest.
You were in Budapest.
Followed it closely.
What do you think is the most important thing to come out of this G20 meeting? Are we going to do what has to be done to actually solve the problem as opposed to keep kicking it down the road?
I want to give a high five to Occupy Wall Street and the fact that Sarkozy, Merkel, and Obama are all up for re-election next year. Because without those social pressures, the answer would be nothing would get done or even mentioned. What we did in the G20 this year is we reversed course from the clamor for austerity that began in Toronto. And they said,
Toronto being the previous G20 meeting.
Yeah, a couple of
right.
And so they come out and they say austerity doesn't work anymore. We need jobs, growth. We're worried about youth unemployment. And we got to get tough on bank regulation. And two good guys Philip Hildebrand from the Swiss National Bank, who's been tough on the Swiss banks, and Mark Carney from the Bank of Canada. Excellent, excellent people. Just got named ahead of the Financial Stability Board. It got elevated. They want to do bank tax, and they want to do more capital on the top 20 so-called too big to fail banks.
So what we're seeing, I mean, I think what's fascinating here is, Naomi Klein wrote a book called The Shock Doctrine, and the thesis of it was that there's this inherent tension between the kind of a neoliberal vision of an economic order with privatized government, gutting the welfare state, and that has been imposed by the IMF for years, and we're seeing sort of as the conditions of the austerity program for Greece, which has to sell off a ton of public assets, and actually what democratic majorities want. And what you're saying is it is the democratic pressure of upcoming elections for the world's most important economic leaders, Angela Merkel in Germany, Sarkozy in France, and Barack Obama in the U.S., that is producing a global mandate for a program that reverses course from the sort of disastrous austerity fetish that we were on.
The legitimacy of our financial regulatory system, of unemployment, of the entire set of outcomes that relate to the economy is shot. It's just not working. Throw in environmental stuff.
Right.
So these guys have to, what you might call, rebrand themselves. And they better get on their horse because they're a little late to the game.
Can I go back and ask you a question about the restructuring of the banks that has gotten everyone frightened, like you say? Why is that? Is it because if they're to take a haircut here and we're to put that sort of on the books, that people begin to understand that there may already be insolvent and that we're looking at, in some respects, sort of an extend and pretend type of situation?
We've been doing extend and pretend in U.S. mortgages, Greek. But you talk about the credit default swaps. Credit default swaps, nobody knows how big they are because you don't have to just confine yourself to an insurable risk. You can do as much as you want and go wild.
Yeah, I spent yesterday on the website of the Bank of International Settlements and on reading the Financial Times, trying to figure out what is the exposure of American banks to Greek default through these instruments called credit default swaps, which is essentially insurance on those bonds, right? If Greece goes under, we have to pay out because we sold these credit default swaps. And of course, it was credit default swaps on mortgage-backed securities that was what produced the calamitous destruction of Lehman. And what I found in several hours of trying to find this was that what you said is true. No one actually really knows what the exposure is. And to me, that's a really worrying lesson about the lessons that we have not learned from the last financial crisis. Rob Johnson is a senior fellow at the Roosevelt Institute and a great beacon of wisdom on a very complicated topic. Thanks so much for being here today. Here at home, the accusations continue to mount against Herman Cain. Is race a factor? That's coming up next.